Okay, I'm gonna get started. So, um, welcome to the last in the spooky season story times. I hope you've enjoyed joining in and listening to all different stories, or that you've checked out some of the ones that have been posted online. Some extra little spooky poems, which is really cool. They can all be found on YouTube. Today is a little bit special, obviously, because it is Halloween. So happy Halloween! I am all prepared. I have treats for the trick-or-treaters. I have my pumpkin spice lemonade, which is actually really, really nice. So I'll keep that there. We have our decorations. It's a little bit shame, the picture's gone a bit small, but we have lots of pumpkins. The lights are actually pumpkin lights, some little ghosts, some little stuff for witches as well. I've got a little quadrant, I've got my little hat on. It's nice and dark for a reason, obviously. And for a guest of honour, we have Pooh Bear in his pumpkin outfit. How cool is that? You look amazing, Pooh Bear. So I'm going to put you here so that you can be seen. There we go. And you can look after all of the trick-or-treating candy. Do not eat it all. I've purposely made sure there's no honey in there, so he won't be eating them. So let's have a look at the decorations as well. So we'll put that there like that. We also have our very own little witch's cat, who you might see pop up from time to time. He's the wrong colour for the lighting, but it's okay. He's actually having his little nap now, so he's going to be sitting down beside us. You might see him wander back and forth because he really, really likes the lights. So today we're going to be looking at this book, which is Creating Your Own Vintage Halloween, which sounds a little bit crafty, I understand, but it's actually really, really cool. So yes, there are little bits and pieces inside the book which teach you how to make little arts and crafts to help make your Halloween just a little bit more special, which is really fun, like making haunted house lanterns, which I absolutely adore. But today we're actually going to be reading some of the parts of the book which tell us about different parts of Halloween and how much the history has influenced the story, and also how things have adapted over time. So I have a little bit of I've got little notes with our treasures on of what we're going to look at. But I really hope you enjoy this. This book is by Marion Paull, and I highly recommend anyone who loves their Halloween to get a copy for your own home library. So I really hope you enjoy this today. So we'll start, where all good stories start, at the beginning. An introduction. Halloween has never been more popular. Trick-or-treating, dressing up, parades, themed parties. The old festival has enjoyed a revival in the UK and Europe. And in America, billions of dollars are spent each year on costumes, decorations, party goods, party food, pumpkins, and of course, candy. Go back 100 or more years, and most of these things are homemade. Innovation, imagination were given free rein, and it didn't really matter if the results were glitzy or homey. The preparations were all part of it. Halloween was a fabulous excuse for a party. By the mid-19th century, the old Halloween festival had mostly faded into obscurity, localised even in Celtic regions of the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the Isle of Man, and the West Country, as well as Northern Ireland, until with mass immigration into America it started to capture the collective imagination stateside. Within a few generations, Halloween had been transformed from a collection of slightly quirky regional rituals into a community get-together, a family fun day. Observance and customs developed along regional lines, but the universal overall theme was the same. It was a happy fairy tale time, despite a certain boisterousness with pranks and practical jokes, made all the better for the frizzen of a little extra spookiness and an element of daring to be frightened, although you knew with your sensible head that this was absolutely nothing to be frightened of. Just as much a part of old-fashioned Halloween are the costumes, decorations, and jack-o'-lanterns. There were fortune-telling games. These were indispensable to the night's entertainment. Of course, none of the charms were ever guaranteed to work. In fact, they were not really expected to provide accurate predictions for the future, but it was fun to have a go and to follow the old traditions. They were all part of the amusements for an annual occasion that was, and still is, quite different from any other. In these sophisticated high-tech days of rampant commercialisation, looking back to simpler times can be an undeniable appeal, and enthusiasm for all things vintage could be hardly left out one of fall's main events, Halloween. It continues to be celebrated with such gusto and commitment because it changes with the times. But sometimes it's great to rewind and discover things just how they were done in your grandparents' time and great-grandparents' day. It's also oddly heartening to know that even in this modern age, when everything changes with bewildering speed, vague links with an older time can still be traced, and vestiges of even older ways may have survived. So Halloween is kind of thought to have come from a festival called Samhain, which orientated out of like the Celtic cultures, but very much Ireland. And it was a time to celebrate the end of the summer. So Halloween is obviously kind of developed over time from that, and as the book kind of indicates, it has changed with the times because things have come to be associated with Halloween that were never around over 2,000 years ago when Samhain first kind of originated. So it's pretty cool actually to still be involved in something like that and to be able to make it into something that everyone can enjoy. Cool. So the next part we're going to look at is we're going to be looking at how it is influenced stateside. So an American holiday. Some really cool pictures in this book are all the vintage Halloween postcards, which if I go a little bit closer is actually really cool. I'll find some more as well as we go in and show you the pictures. Fall festivals have long been abundant all over America, varying from state to state and from county to county. So how did Halloween come to be a nationwide holiday celebrated with such enthusiasm by all ages and second only to Christmas in terms of financial outlay? It first came to prominence in the mid-19th century when what had been a trickle of immigrants from Europe turned into a positive tsunami. Wave upon wave of Irish arrived in just a couple of years, escaping from starvation in their homeland. A combination of potato blight, failed harvests, high taxes, and no effective famine relief led to millions taking a ship to the New World. In Scotland, the Highland clearances of the 18th and the first part of the 19th centuries contributed to many Scots heading for Canada and America. An economy in dire straits and landowners increasingly relying on sheep to get them out of trouble led to mass evictions from the land. When this was coupled with financial inducements to immigrate, many of the poorest had no choice. As time went on, unemployment and little prospect of finding jobs led to many more, often skilled craftsmen, choosing to relocate to the land of opportunity in the hope and belief of finding a better life and building a future for their families. Naturally, the new arrivals brought with them their customs and traditions of their birthplace, and amongst these was keeping of October 31st, All Hallows Eve, with abundant festivals. To start with, this did not go down too well in New England, which remained a strictly Protestant region where Puritan values were upheld and folk didn't hold such frivolities. In Maryland and places further south, though, the event was welcomed. There, people got together for community celebrations with singing and dancing, stories and fortune-telling, all rather low-key compared with today. Once the Irish and Scots started arriving in numbers, however, not to mention other European and African immigrants, the idea of Halloween spread rapidly. Americans discovered that this old festival could be fun and embraced it with open arms. So I think really I kind of used to think that Halloween came from America, so it's kind of cool to think it's actually something that they've adapted and they've shared with other people as well. So now we're going to move on to some other little stories. So I'm just going to jump through the book to the next page. And we tell a little story called A Joke That Misfired. The Capitol building in Washington, D.C. was the scene of one prank that went wrong. A police officer who had recently started in the job was on duty on the night of October 31st, 1885. All was in darkness as he made a routine patrol, which was an uneventful until he came to the statuary hall, where he heard the sound of groaning coming from one corner of the room. Approaching warily, the officer saw what he thought he saw, a spectral figure. What else do you do? But shoot it. It's very American. So he drew his gun and fired several times. Fortunately, he missed. The spectral figure turned out to be his fellow officer playing a Halloween prank on the new boy. This story has entered the history of the Capitol, but what happened to the two officers concerned doesn't appear to be recorded. And being in 1885, it makes you wonder if maybe they just came back to the scene of the crime every Halloween, which would be really cool if they did. So we're going to move on to another kind of little story that has some Halloween significance. So this is a little bit about Harry Houdini. So the reason why we're going to talk about Harry Houdini is because he's featured in a section called Haunted Attractions at Midnight Horror Shows. So obviously these can be things like nowadays, like when you go to the horror mazes, which can be local, or some of the big, more commercial ones at theme parks, which I have been to and I have been very scared of. So, and I think everyone who goes is very, very brave. But I've heard that even now, in COVID times, there's been an adaptation to that, and they are actually mazes that you can go through in your car. But I've been told very strictly from my friends, I am not allowed to drive, just in case I get scared and hit the accelerator. So, we'll move on. Harry Houdini, the famous escapologist, magician and stuntman, was also a keen debunker of fraudsters. He made it his business to expose fake psychics, spiritualists, mediums, and anyone who was likely to give his profession a bad name. In his time, he escaped from chains, shackles, handcuffs, and straitjackets, often while nailed in packing cases or tied in mailbags and dumped underwater. In one stunt, he was buried alive. He was the master of his craft, and his name is still synonymous with seemingly impossible escapes. Houdini died of peritonitis in 1926 on Halloween. So I think that's kind of cool. It's very fitting that a man who is synonymous with what some consider to be magic to actually have a very strong attachment to Halloween, obviously being the day that the world lost him, which is very sad, but also a cool legend to have. So we're going to move on to a little story now, and we're going to be talking about jack-o'-lanterns. So some cool little artwork there. So obviously the theme of today's Halloween for me and Pooh Bear is jack-o'-lanterns. So it's a shame you can't actually see our shirts, but he has it this way around and I have the opposite. So we're matching, so it's kind of cool. And obviously there's pumpkins everywhere and lots of orange lights. I think even our treats are in pumpkins, so that's kind of cool. So jack-o'-lanterns are a big theme. According to popular belief, Halloween jack-o'-lanterns originated in Ireland hundreds of years ago. They were also made in Scotland and England. Turnips, swedes, and sugar beets were hollowed out and carved with grotesque faces. An ember or candle was placed inside them to make them even more startling. Besides keeping supernatural forces at bay, jack-o'-lanterns were supposed to guide the souls of the dead relatives back to their earthly bodies for just that one night. Later, irrelevant youngsters would carve out and illuminate their turnips and leave them in lonely, shadowy places along the road to frighten the life out of anyone who was passing by that way. Jack-o'-lanterns soon became as indispensable to Halloween as decorated trees are to Christmas. Every self-respecting party giver made them to enhance their spooky atmosphere. They were positioned on windowsills, in yards, and on steps up to the front door. They were carried in parades by trick-or-treaters who propped them up outside windows to scare those inside, just as the pranksters of earlier generations had stationed them outside to frighten unwary passersby. These days, they are often used by householders to indicate whether the trick-or-treaters are welcome. A jack-o'-lantern in the front yard or window means candy awaits. A pumpkin with a thinner skin than the others is grown especially for carving, making jack-o'-lanterns at Halloween is part of the fun. So that was part of the story, and we've actually got quite a few cool little pages. Even the bookmark's a pumpkin. How cool is this? I quite like that. That's very cool. And there's some great artwork there. And there's even a little Atty in a pumpkin. How cool is that? So some of these obviously come from some more traditions though. So one of the stories is the legend of Stingy Jack. So we're going to look into that as well. Many versions of this old Irish folktale exist, all telling more or less the same story of how jack-o'-lantern got its name. Jack, a greedy, bad-tempered man known as a liar and a cheat and a trickster, unsurprisingly, had few friends, but he did enjoy a drink. On his way home one night, he is accosted by the devil. Fearing his time has come, Jack makes a final request. One more drink of ale. The devil agrees and accompanies Jack to the nearest tavern to partake in a glass of two. When Jack asks the devil to pay as agreed, the devil, the great shapeshifter of them all, turns himself into a silver coin. Jack, not quite so befuddled as he may be imagined to be, rather than paying for the ale, puts the coin in his pocket, where he carries a crucifix. The devil is trapped. Once outside the alehouse, Jack offers a deal. He will set the devil free in exchange for the evil one leaving him alone for 10 years. 10 years later, the devil confronts Jack again. This time, Jack asks for an apple for his last request, and the devil, who seems a tad foolish in this tale, climbs the nearest tree to pick one. Jack, of course, quickly carves a few crosses in the bark, trapping the devil again. Now the price of Jack's help is that the devil should never claim his soul, and a fateful bargain is struck. Jack, securing the knowledge that he is never going to hell, carries on with his life as before, not worrying about the consequences. Unfortunately for him, when he eventually dies, he discovers there is no place for such a sinner in heaven, and is unceremoniously turned away. He has no choice but to drag himself off to hell, where the devil is adamant about keeping his promise made all those years ago. As Jack turns away, the devil throws him a piece of burning coal, and Jack, doomed to wander forever in search of a place to rest, hollows out a turnip and puts the coal inside to light him on his way. He carries his light and so becomes Jack of the Lantern, which is shortened today to Jack-o'-lantern. Now that's a really cool story. I really like that one. Another little legend around lights and being misleading in the dark is the will-o'-the-wisps. In folklore, jack-o'-lanterns and will-o'-the-wisps, also known as spook lights, ghost lights, are often interchangeable Will-o'-the-wisps were mysterious lights that appeared in lonely places at night to guide travellers, often away from the path and into dangerous territory, such as bogs, marshes or swamps. These eerie lights were known by various names around Britain and Europe, and many ghostly tales are attached to them. One story, very similar to the legend of Stingy Jack, has it that when Will the Smith, a bad-living blacksmith, died, he was given a second chance by St. Peter and sent back to Earth to have another go. He messed that one up too, continued his wicked ways, and so was condemned to wander forever, a single burning ember, his only light and comfort, which he used to lure unsuspecting travellers into danger. Some people never change. In fact, these treacherous lights, and unearthly lights, are thought to have been caused by the spontaneous combustion of marsh gases, mostly methane, generated by rotting organic matter. So it's quite a cool little story. It does have some kind of scientific explanation, but I think for Halloween we can always just ignore that little bit just for today and enjoy the story of Will, who hangs around the dark corners of the forest and tries to trap unsuspecting victims by shining his light. And Jack, obviously, too. So now we're going to go on to a little subject, which is one that is obviously going to be something that has a massive significance for me. So let me get the page up because this is quite fun. So we're going to be talking about black cats, which is quite prompt. He's actually asleep, so it's a shame he can't be in the bit that he's starring in, but still. There's some great vintage pictures in this book as well, more postcards. It seems to be that Halloween postcards were very much a massive thing in the early 20th century and back in Victorian times as well, which is really cool. I think I'm definitely going to have to get some. So let's have a little look into black cats. Cats have long been associated with superstition and religious belief. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Bastet took the form of a black cat. The Egyptians honoured cats, embalmed their bodies when they died, and buried them in mummy cases. In Norse mythology, the goddess Freya rides in the chariot pulled by two enormous grey cats. The Greek goddess Artemis and the Roman Diana are both associated with cats, while in Japan, the beckoning of a cat symbolises the goddess of mercy. The story goes that a cat was saved by passing local ruler and beckoned him into the temple just before lightning struck, when the place where he had been standing got hit. So now beckoning a black cat symbolises good health, a gold one symbolises wealth. In medieval times, however, the fortune of black cats in particular took a downturn in parallel to the rise in the belief that witches were in league with the devil. Black cats took the role of witches' familiars, creatures that provided a link to their satanic master. Although other animals, including owls, bats and toads, could be familiars, a black cat was the one witches were most likely to turn themselves into and back again should the need arise. Page. A story that crops up from that time is that 13th century Pope Gregory IX was responsible for linking black cats to devil worship, leading to their long-term mass extermination and thus indirectly a pandemic of the plague. The feared Black Death certainly swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiping out approximately a third of the population. 100 years or so earlier, Gregory had allegedly issued an edict, Vox in Rama, condemning a devilish cult that seemed to be flourishing in Germany at the time, and describing in detail how Satan took the form of a black cat in all the rituals. This was enough for all black cats to be condemned as incarnations of the devil. The logic goes that as a consequence, with fewer cats to prey on them, black rats were able to go forth and multiply in their millions. The rats carried the fleas that caused the plague, and thus the infection spread like wildfire. However, no trace of Voxinrama apparently survives, and whether it ever existed at all is open to doubt. Without any real evidence to support it, the story involves too many assumptions to be taken at face value, and perhaps can be better regarded as medieval urban myth. So that's quite cool, considering we have our own little pandemic at the moment. Maybe having a black cat's actually quite lucky. You can stay, Atty, it's okay. But such tales have a way of permeating the popular mind, so that after a while they are taken as fact despite being nothing of the sort. Thus hearsay and legend can be passed down through generations and evolve into what may become regarded as common knowledge. Perhaps that's why black cats retained their devilish connotation for several hundred years. However that may be, the Pilgrims brought their superstitions about black cats and witchcraft with them when they settled in Massachusetts in 1620. Other immigrants, especially from Germany, Holland, Haiti and Africa, brought their own customs, often also involving black cats and sorcery. So by the time Halloween was adopted wholeheartedly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as a great excuse for a party, black cats and witches had become an inseparable to them as Toto and Dorothy. The folklore had melded, and although it had been observed to continue to vary from region to region, witches and their black cats had become an integral part of it, and all the years went by, many of these fearsome black cats had a tendency to turn into unbelievably cute kittens. Now that is a fact. You are a very cute little kitten. So if we go back and look at some of these pictures again, which is really cool, there are some other ones as we went through that I managed to miss, which is kind of cool. I love this one. This one's very cute. It's almost like it's just a really nice thing to just send your friends a Hallmark Halloween card, which is really cool. So that's quite fun. So now we're going to move on to the friend of the little black cats, some witches. So I suppose they don't help themselves, considering this picture also has a little black cat in it too. Cool. Ooh, get that page right. Back at the turn of the last century, Halloween witches were not the provocative sirens of today. Vintage witches hark back to the days of floating black cloaks, pointed hats and chins, warty nose, flying broomsticks, and streaming cauldrons. These are the traditional witches of fairy tales. One superstition said if you want to meet a witch, you should put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards on October 31st. But there really was no need to go to all these lengths, because they were everywhere, on cards adorning houses, wandering the streets, at parties, parading through town. Witches have been with us since time immemorial. In olden times, they were thought to be wise healers, but gradually, as beliefs and superstitions changed, they became regarded as much more negatively and were denounced as heretics by the church. Up until the last few hundred years, belief in them was common, and these people thought to be witches commanded fear or respect depending on your point of view. They were said to be practice magic for good or evil and indulge in the black arts. Anyone suspected of witchcraft was hunted down. Paranoia against witches was at its height in Europe from the 1300s to the 1600s, and many ordinary folk, especially women with knowledge of herbs and healing, were prosecuted. In America, notorious witch trials took place at Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, when 150 men and women were imprisoned and many died, one way or another. This outbreak of supposed witchery was eventually put down to mass hysteria, local rivalries, and possibly a toxic fungus that could be found in the cereal crops, and causes muscle spasms, vomiting and hallucinations. Rye bread was a staple of the settlers' diet at the times. By the 1900s, though, witches had lost their fearful aura and metamorphosed into the deliciously scary Halloween favourites of many children intent on dressing up and party-going to the spirit of the times. So, there's some great little pictures there on this page. Let me go a little bit closer. There we go. And I highly recommend that if you get a chance to do read into the story of the Salem witches, but also actually read into the story of the witches of Pendle Hill, which I believe is in Lancashire, because what happened in that story is directly led to what happened in Salem in Massachusetts. So the origins can be found in northern England. So we'll move over from witches now to another staple of the Halloween spirit, literally, ghosts. Ghosts, spectres, spirits. Belief in them seems to be common in varying degrees to almost every culture. In Celtic lore, the festival of their time, this was when the souls of the dead returned to earth, and this is how the living reacted depending on whether they wanted to be attracted to the spirits or hide from them. The spirits of your own ancestors may have had nothing but friendly intent, but others abroad that night may have had other ideas. If passing ghosts found no offering set out for them, the household would be inviting bad luck for the coming year. Early shades of trick-or-treating, perhaps. With the creation of Hallowmas, All Hallows Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, the link with the dead was cemented. This was a time to be praying for the souls of those who had passed on and concentrate on death and what it is to become, and to focus the mind in matters spiritual. In colonial days, when the observance of Halloween was by no means universal across America, the telling of ghost stories was part of what was, by today's standards, a rather muted occasion. The custom was continued through the Halloween changes and adaptations right up until present day, so a vintage Halloween should include a good ghost story and, if possible, a visit to a haunted house. There's no need to be scared. All the apparitions you'll see most likely to be of the store-bought variety. The likelihood of seeing a ghost that doesn't resemble someone dressed up in a bedsheet with 2 holes for eyes is fairly remote, and even if you did happen to come across one, all you have to do is walk around it 9 times and it'll disappear. Victorian tales of spectres, phantoms, and general eeriness are best read aloud by firelight or candlelight. Atmosphere is everything. Charles Dickens wrote some wonderful ghost tales, including The Trial for Murder and The Signalman, Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher, Jerome K. Jerome's The Man of Silence, or Mrs. Henry Wood's Reality or Delusion are guaranteed to scare the assembled listeners witless. The legends of Bloody Mary and Black Aggie are always good for retelling, if goriness is required, as it is the story of the Bell Witch. In the early 1800s, Tennessee farmer John Bell's family were persecuted by a malicious supernatural being, and his malevolent spirit revisits his descendants from time to time. A Halloween Wraith by William Black, on the other hand, has a happy ending, and so stands a better chance of sending the children to bed in a less jumpy frame of mind. There are some really cool little ghost stories, so you should always try and read or tell someone a little ghost story on Halloween. So now we're going to jump to costumes. Costumes and masks. Mass-produced costumes specifically designed for Halloween first appeared in stores in the 1930s, just as trick-or-treating was getting underway and everyone spent their first part of their night out on the streets in search of candy and fun. Before then, costumes and masks were mainly homemade and usually just for children. They were supposed to be scary or of some supernatural beings. Often they consisted of not much more than a weird papier-mâché mask, or one drawn on extraordinarily thick paper or card, tied on with a string. Witches, skulls, and spooks were popular, but most were just downright peculiar, depending on the maker's skill or lack of it, and the imagination. Some kids succeeded in looking like latter-day Ned Kellys, but probably not intentionally. There's a great little picture here for this introduction. Children would appear in parents' old coats that were far too big for them, or wrapped up in blankets or rugs. Sheets with cut-out eyes and a painted-on face, possibly of a cat, were not unusual. Party frocks could be assembled with black silhouettes of bats, toads, cats and witches on broomsticks. The better off who went to formal parties and balls would have had glitzy masks and costumes, especially made, but for other folk, improvisation was the key. Formal Halloween parties in the interwar years often had a fancy dress theme, such as famous people, with a Halloween twist, which allowed the imagination to run riot. Some featured games, such as bridge and mahjong, others seem to have been less sedate. Perhaps it was easier to let your hair down while costumed and masked and pretending to be somebody else. Among the first commercially produced costumes, witches, goblins, ghosts, skeletons and pumpkins reigned supreme, with pirates, clowns, and even mummies getting in on the act. Favourite movie characters such as Sis Hopkins from the 1919 comedy film of the same name had already made their appearance. The scarier variety of the increasingly popular horror genre, such as Dracula and Frankenstein, gradually began to turn up on the doorstep, followed by zombies, werewolves and aliens. Superheroes weren't far behind. In a web posting on 2004, Fred Lawrence recalls back to 1939. It was customary to wear a costume to school on Halloween, and his mother had made him a Superman outfit. Superman first flew into the rescue in 1938. The costume was magnificent, in blue, red and yellow, with a big S and a flowing red cape. He was the star of the show, the happiest lad in the world on that Halloween. These days, it's not just the kids who indulge in fancy dress. The most popular adult themes, according to the National Retail Federation, are witches, pirates, vampires, cats and clowns. So far, so traditional. But it doesn't stop there. Each year, among grown-ups and youngsters alike, movie stars, musicians, cartoon characters, and even politicians make their appearance alongside cowboys, angels, princesses, and whatever else catches the imagination. Traffic lights, ninjas, bananas, anything goes. Or Pooh Bears in pumpkins. If you want to go vintage, stick to traditional witchy and ghosty themes, and pumpkins have never gone out of style. It's fun to make your own costume, but if it's not your skill or time is short, it's not cheating to buy one in a vintage style. An original would be terrific, but that sounds very expensive. So they're the main kind of traditions of Halloween, which I think everyone can kind of relate to, because everyone has their own Halloween traditions, but that's the ones that really kind of stand out, and where they come from is really interesting. So we'll finish up today so that you can all get back to your own celebrations with some Halloween superstitions. Finish your journey by sunset if you don't want to run into wandering spirits. Salt was always thought to be a witch's repellent, so if you're out and about, carry a piece of bread crossed with salt to be on the safe side. A flickering candle flame indicates the presence of a visiting soul. Knocking over a candle is very bad. Anyone born on All Hallows Eve has the gift of second sight. Catch a falling leaf for good luck and for good health during the winter. At the stroke of midnight on All Hallows Eve, observe a minute or two's silence to show respect for the visiting spirits. Brooming the house from front to back sweeps all the past year's troubles away and leaves it ready for whatever the new year may bring. Listen to the wind to hear the whispers about the future. Prepare a meal in silence and eat it at midnight, also in silence, if you want a spirit to join you at the table. This is known as a dumb supper. A girl deciding whether to accept a proposal of marriage should take 3 hairs from a cat's tail, good luck with that one, wrap them loosely in paper and place them under a doormat. If in the morning the hairs seem to have formed a Y or an N, then she will know what to reply. So they are all very vintagey superstitions, but I think it's a great way to finish our little collection of creating a vintage Halloween. So thank you to Marion and Paull for putting the book together. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for spending some of your Halloween with me and Pooh Bear, and we hope that you really enjoyed all the stories. So, from me, Pooh Bear, and a very sleepy little black cat next to us, happy Halloween! Bye!